Welcome to another episode of Purpose Today. I'm your host, Dr. April Dobson, and I'm very excited about a new episode of the Purpose Today with Dr. April Dobson podcast. On today, I am going to talk about transforming your organization, 5 expert strategies for a purpose driven reorg. Now, on today's episode, I'm going to talk about the essential strategies before restructures. And every organizational leader at some point might have to face a time that your organization has to undergo a restructure. And you want to be properly positioned and ensure that you're introducing the right approaches to a restructure. Now, I want to talk about these 5 things that will help you to ensure that your organization is successful with the restructure. Now, it's very important that you are communicating and collaborating early on. It's important that you clarify the mission, that you introduce efficiencies, that you determine the baseline resources, and that you also review and approve proposed structure at the appropriate levels. Now, I'm going to unpack all of these today, and this will help to ensure that as an organizational leader, you are able to properly position your organization for success. And we're going to talk about this more in depth after a few sponsorship messages. Now, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Today's episode of Purpose Today with Dr. April Dobson is brought to you by the Purpose Professionals community in partnership with Purpose Today Global LLC. If you're a professional who has a desire to ensure that your profession is aligned with your purpose, if you want to pivot to align with your purpose, continue to grow professionally, network with like-minded professionals, or if you are a business owner who wants to ensure that your business is aligned with your purpose, then join the Purpose Professionals community. The Purpose Professionals community has relocated from school to the new platform, and to connect with the Purpose Professionals community, click the link in the YouTube chat. Welcome back to Purpose Today. I am so excited about this new episode. Throughout my professional career, both in the private sector, the public sector, both military and government civilians, I've had to help to administer reorganizations. I've helped to guide leaders to restructure their organizations, and I've even had to plan and execute a reorganization for several of my own organizations as a leader. And so I want to ensure that you are equipped with these tools and strategies that will help you and your organization ensure success. So let's jump right into it, and we're going to talk about the first one, and that is communicating and collaborating early on. Now, I will say that a lot of organizational leaders will wait until the decision has been made to restructure. They will wait until the plans are either completed or near completion before they begin communicating with staff to share insight regarding the reorganization. And they'll often wait to collaborate until restructuring is underway. And I would encourage you to actually switch that practice if you are engaging in that practice, and collaborate and communicate early on. Now, the collaboration is going to be strictly internal initially until it's time to bring in external stakeholders. Initially, you should be collaborating or um, directing collaboration, should I say, at all levels internally, and you should be communicating with staff at all levels internally to ensure that they are made aware of the plans for a restructure. And when you give this insight to staff early on, they trust you. You're also ensuring that you can receive vital information to ensure that the restructure is successful. And you want to establish focus groups that will be specific to your organization, as you know, there are collaborations. And it's not required that as a leader that you attend all of these focus groups. You want to appoint staff for the different focus groups, and at a minimum you should have a reporting cycle and the types of information that you want reported, and what kind of cadence that should be for. And with the communication, you want to start communicating in person first. Now, there may possibly be geographically separated employees and units that you are responsible for leading. So if it's not possible for you to travel and meet with them in person, then I recommend having a virtual town hall with all personnel present, and at least sharing that there are, that there is the potential for a restructure within the organization, and that you want to at least share that insight, and you want to give an opportunity for questions and answers. It's very important that staff know that their voice is heard, that their perspectives are valued, and it's so important to involve staff at all levels, because you're going to receive different perspectives, you're going to receive different insight, you're going to receive essential information that's needed to plan effectively, and you're going to also avoid any group think that might occur if you only have a limited number of people who are involved in the collaboration. Now, I want to say this: as you have, or after you've communicated orally about the potential for a restructure, then you can start sending things in writing. It's great to send a follow-up communication, and you want a full communication strategy, and you want to have a regular cadence that you are updating staff, both in writing and orally, right? And again, that can be done in person or through virtual town halls via Zoom, Teams, whatever platform your organization is utilizing. And you can also determine at what point you want to involve external stakeholders, but initially it should be internal. So that is the very first step that you want to take. And in the communication and collaboration, there's a lot of different methods that you can use. You want to receive feedback in those town halls, in the meetings that you're having, the all hands meetings. You also want to ensure that you're doing some kind of survey so that you can receive valuable insight from a quantitative and qualitative standpoint, and you can use that as you're moving forward. You also want to ensure that with your focus groups, you're annotating key takeaways and considerations ahead of any restructuring plans. So it's also important to clarify the mission. What better time can you use to actually ensure that your written mission is aligned with what your organization is actually doing? And sometimes there's changes, right? There's changes based on requirements. There's changes based on advancements in technology, how the growth of your organization, the changes to your customer base. There's so many different things that will impact your mission, but you want to receive input from staff at all levels, as well as your external stakeholders on their perspective regarding the mission, regarding what your organization has been doing to impact within and outside of the organization, to see whether or not there are any changes that are necessary for the mission statement. This can also be a question that you can add to the survey, and you can have a place for individuals who are responding to the survey to weigh in on any changes that they recommend. But as you are looking at the mission, you should be looking at the values, you should be looking at the objectives of an organization to see what other changes are necessary. So don't proceed with any changes towards restructuring until you've evaluated the mission to determine whether or not there are some changes that are needed, because that might impact, and it very well will impact, the structure of the organization. It's also important to introduce efficiencies. Now, in a prior podcast episode, I talked about questions that leaders should ask their staff. And as you are giving an opportunity for internal and external stakeholders to present efficiencies, starting with your internal stakeholders and your staff, this will help to refine how you are executing on your mission. It'll help to enhance your service delivery. This is very, very, very crucial. It is so important to introduce efficiencies that you can introduce, and you want to give an opportunity for staff at all levels to present efficiencies. This is also an opportunity to receive insight from external stakeholders and customers of, how they view your services or the service delivery, and what they would recommend, what they appreciate and what they would like to see enhanced, or what are opportunities that would be valuable for them, right? This is important to identify and introduce efficiencies. So once you have ensured that efficiencies are identified and introduced, then you can determine the baseline resources. Now, when you are communicating and collaborating internally with staff and stakeholders, you should have had your human resources department or your human capital department. Some organizations have one or the other, some have both. You should have had them involved. And if for whatever reason someone was left out, you want to make sure that you bring them into the focus groups and into the conversations at this point. Again, it's good to include them in the first stage, right? But if you haven't, you definitely want to include them at this stage. You also want to include, if you have manpower, you want to include them. You want to include your financial management and budget teams and departments, because they're going to be crucial in helping you to ensure that you have the right funding levels for these changes that will be made. You also want to ensure that you are including any policy staff. That is very important because with the changes to the organizational structure, they can tell you whether or not any policies are going to be impacted, right? You want to ensure that you involve your facilities folks, individuals who are responsible for your office space, because there may be a process that's needed as you're restructuring to move office spaces, to add spaces, to reduce spaces, whatever is necessary. You want to be sure that you are doing that. You want to have focus groups that are also your leadership teams throughout the organization to ensure that they are in turn keeping their direct reports advised and apprised of developments. This is very, very, very important. As you're thinking about your baseline resources, you want to determine your baseline resources from a fiscal standpoint, FISCAL, fiscal standpoint. You want to determine your baseline resources from a physical standpoint. What are the physical resources that you need in terms of space, in terms of desk, in terms of equipment? What are all of the physical resources that are needed for the organization based on everything that you've done to this point, including those efficiencies that have been introduced? And you want to also think about the human capital and human resources that are needed for what you intend to do, the direction that you're going in. And in this process, you want to determine whether or not you require, how many full-time equivalents, FTEs, you require, or as some people say, how many billets. You want to determine how many part-time positions are required, how many employees are required, how many contractors are required, whether or not there are seasonal requirements. All of these things should be identified. And as you're determining fiscal resources, that also includes what technology resources, software, equipment, all of these things go into play. And of course, you want to include your IT teams. All of your focus groups should ensure that every aspect of the organization in the current and future state, that it is addressed, and that you have these stakeholders communicating with each other as necessary, and you have focus groups to ensure that your efforts are effective, right? So, and then after you've identified the baseline resources, I think that should be staffed through the organization just to ensure that you aren't missing anything. And then finally, once you have the proposed restructure, you want to review and approve that proposed structure, and you want to ensure that that is also staffed through to the right people within the organization. You want to ensure that that proposal is presented at the focus groups, that it's presented with the leadership teams, and that it is presented with the staff so that people have an opportunity to weigh in, so that there aren't any blind spots or considerations that were overlooked, right? That is extremely important. Now, I have touched on these 5 key strategies that you want to ensure that you are utilizing before you even commence a restructure within your organization. I've tried to answer the questions either orally or in the chat along the way. I may have missed something, but it is important that you have these vital strategies that are in place before the restructure. It is important. So again, ensure that you're communicating and collaborating early on. Don't wait until you've started the restructure. You want to ensure that you are communicating and collaborating regarding the potential restructure before you even commence any restructure plans. That is so vital, and you will find that each stakeholder, each staff member will have different perspectives that they're going to introduce, and you'll find that it's going to save a lot of time and effort in the process. Again, you want to clarify the mission and introduce efficiencies that are necessary prior to making any changes. You want to ensure that you're determining what the baseline resources are. We talked about all different types of resources. We talked about the monetary resources. We talked about physical resources. We talked about human resources, human capital. And organizations cannot achieve any success without people. And I want to really say this, and I know I didn't say this as we were talking about it. There are a lot of organizations that are replacing people with AI. And AI really should be used as a force multiplier, not to necessarily replace employees. And I had a prior podcast that Dr. Iyanu and I actually talked about how you can use AI for returns, for significant returns. And if you missed that episode, I do encourage you to go back and watch it. And I am planning to have Dr. Iyanu to come back again for a future episode so we can talk more about AI and how to use AI as a force multiplier. So you want to ensure that as you're making these plans, you're not replacing employees with AI, because while AI has some efficiencies that it introduces and it can really streamline processes and really reduce the amount of time, there are deficiencies with AI. So you want to use it as a force multiplier. And again, I encourage you to go to that podcast episode and watch it, because Dr. Iyanu and I had a very insightful discussion, and I believe that that's going to help you as you're considering AI. And then, I want to also mention that it's important that you ensure that the proposed structure is reviewed and approved at all levels, and that you are able to have an opportunity for staff to weigh in, because you want to ensure that you're not effectuating these changes and then discovering after a restructure that there were some shortfalls, and you have to go back and do another restructure shortly after doing the first restructure. So you want to avoid that. You want to make sure that your restructure is flawless. And of course, some of these steps do need to be, repeated. But ultimately, after a final decision is made and it's approved, you again want to have a communication strategy for that. And again, you should be meeting to speak orally with staff and then communicate in writing following that. Now, I do want to mention, and I don't want to go into this extensively because this is something I would like to talk about once I do the future episode about using AI as a force multiplier. But with restructures, it is important that if for whatever reason, because of the restructure, your organization determines that downsizing is required, that you allow staff at all levels to weigh in on what their personal preferences are. Do they prefer to have an option to retire? Even if they're not within the retirement age, would they like an option to retire early under a voluntary early retirement? Would they like an option to be reassigned to a different part of the organization in a different function? Because, studies show that over 90% of people are not aligned with their purpose. And studies also show that over 70% of people are actively looking for a job change. So there may be an opportunity for individuals within the organization to be reassigned to a different department or be reassigned to a different role that better aligns with their purpose or better aligns with, career goals that they have, right? So you want to ask those questions to ensure that you are restructuring effectively, and don't just say unilaterally, we're going to lay off, 500 people, and you just use only the seniority to determine who's laid off. There should be an approach to ensure that things are done as efficiently and effectively as possible. And when you give an opportunity for staff to weigh in, oftentimes you may not realize that there may be some staff who want to be reduced to part-time work. So there's just so many different approaches that you can use. But when you're restructuring your organization, if you restructure the right way, it will help to ensure that you are not losing wonderful talent. It'll help to ensure that you are intentional and purposeful about your succession planning, your workforce development, and your talent management. And if you have any specific questions to that, feel free to ask. And if you're interested in booking a consultation, feel free to do that. I'll be sure to drop the links in the chat. But I do appreciate all of your engagement today, and just taking the time and the commitment to be, purpose driven in your approach to restructuring your organization. So I want to thank you all for your time and for watching today's episode of Purpose Today with Dr. April Dobson. It's been such a joy to share essential strategies that you can utilize as a leader before you undergo a restructure in your organization. If you apply these strategies that I shared today, it's going to help you to transform your organization and use these strategies to ensure that you have a purpose-driven reorganization. So thank you again for watching and viewing today. Tomorrow's episode, I encourage you to share with your colleagues, with friends, with family, whoever you know. Tomorrow's episode 50, is going to actually revisit some of the discussion that occurred in a podcast a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm going to share some valuable insight that will help professionals and help leaders to ensure that in 2026 they are shifting their career with purpose. I talked about Pivot with Purpose, 5 Keys to Redefine Your Career on a couple of weeks ago. And so on tomorrow's episode, I'm actually doing a question and answer session. So it will be a live question and answer session that will allow individuals to ask their questions, and it will give an opportunity for them to be intentional and purposeful with strategies that will work for them. I will include some of the questions that were asked after during that episode, and I believe that because the questions were asked, there may be other people who believe that those same questions are vital for them. And so I'll be answering those questions, going more in depth regarding the questions that were asked, and again, giving an opportunity for individuals who are watching to pose their questions. So I encourage you to share this. Tomorrow's episode is going to be insightful, a wonderful Q&A that will be done live. And so I'll be doing my best effort to watch the chat, to answer all of those questions. And I do again thank you for tuning in today's episode of Purpose Today with Dr. April Dobson. I encourage you to make it a purposeful day today and every day. Thank you so much for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you again on tomorrow for another episode of Purpose Today with Dr. April Dobson. Thank you so much for watching today. Have an amazing day.